हैं थॉमस मून हु अमंग द फॉलोइंग सेड रेयतवारी इज ए सिस्टम हु हैज़ प्रिवेल्ड इन इंडिया। रेयतवारी मुनरो और रीड ने वो किया था, तो इन्हीं दोनों में से किसी ने कहा होगा, तो थॉमस मुनरो इम्प्लीमेंटेड द रेयतवारी सिस्टम इन मद्रास इन 1820 एंड बिलीव्ड इट was on a traditional Indian revenue practice. He argued that Indian villages historically practiced direct revenue payments, making रेयतवारी a continuation of an old system. अच्छा, मतलब इन्होंने कहा कि ये कंटिन्यूएशन है। ठीक, जॉन सोर गवर्नर जनरल 1793 to 98 played a role in administrative reform. Alexander Duff, Scottish missionary, evolved in education. ठीक, read helped to implement रेयतवारी but did not make. अच्छा, थॉमस मुनरो मेन आर्किटेक्ट ऑफ रेयतवारी इन मद्रास. Rayotwari was heavily criticized for its high taxation, leading to peasant exploitation. Peasants often had to rely on money lenders, increasing rural indebtedness. ठीक, the British government introduced different land revenue systems in different parts of India. ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट, हाँ बिल्कुल सही है. इट लेड टू क्रिएशन ऑफ डिफरेंट क्लासेस ऑफ इंडियन पेसेंट्री, ये भी सही है. ठीक, ब्रिटिश इम्प्लीमेंटेड डिफरेंट लैंड रेवेन्यू सिस्टम, जैसे परमानेंट सेटलमेंट 1793 में कॉर्नवालिस ने स्टार्ट किया बंगाल, बिहार, उड़ीसा में. क्रिएटेड जमींदार्स लैंड लॉर्ड्स. रेयतवारी 1792 एक्सपेंडेड इन 1820. 1792 में रीड ने 12 महल तमिलनाडु से, और 1820 में मद्रास, बॉम्बे, आसाम. क्रिएटेड पेसेंट प्रोपरिएटोर्स, अरे यार वही रियोट्स प्रोपरियोट्स, अरे कुछ भी. महालवारी 1822 पंजाब यूपी और उधर सिंध विंध में. क्रिएटेड विलेज कम्युनिटी बेस्ड, मतलब सिंध में नहीं, नॉर्थ वेस्ट में. ठीक, 1822 में क्रिएटेड विलेज कम्युनिटी बेस्ड ऑन, ये मैकेंजी और बेंटिक ने किया था. दिस लेड टू क्रिएशन ऑफ डिफरेंट क्लासेस एमंग पेशेंट्स कॉजिंग इकोनॉमिक डिस्पैरिटी. ठीक, जमींदार became powerful feudal lords under permanent settlement, leading to peasant oppression. रेयतवारी peasants were directly taxed but struggled due to excessive revenue demands. When was the Punjab land alienation act passed? To 1900 में पंजाब land alienation 1900 act 1900 was passed to prevent the transfer of agricultural land from peasants to money lenders and non-agriculturalists. ठीक, due to Highland revenue demands, peasants had to mortgage their land to money lenders. This law was meant to protect peasants but also restricted their economic freedom. Similar restrictions were later introduced in other provinces. When was the first tea company in Assam established? तो 1839 में. The Assam Tea Company was established in 1839 with British capital of just 5 lakh. It was first organized tea cultivation initiative in Assam 1839 में. The British encouraged tea plantation in Assam using unindentured laborers under exploitative conditions. ठीक, introduction of who introduced महालवारी settlement in Bengal? तो Lord Holt Mackenzie introduced Mahalwari system in 1822 in the northwestern provinces and later expanded it to Punjab and UP. Under this system, revenue was collected from entire village community, treating it as a unit called Mahal. Mahalwari was a compromise between Jamindari and Rayotwari system. Land revenue was revised periodically, unlike permanent settlement. अच्छा, मैच द फॉलोइंग करते हैं हम लोग. जर्मनी सिस्टम, ये क्या है? ये नॉर्थ इंडिया, जर्मनी नॉर्थ इंडिया. बलूत फ्यूडल रेवेन्यू सिस्टम, ये कहाँ? कर्नाटक. मिरासी महाराष्ट्र. अदादे ये तमिलनाडु. ठीक, तो जर्मनी सिस्टम नॉर्थ इंडिया में ट्रेडिशनल लैंड टेन्योर सिस्टम, जमीनी या जमीनी. बलूत कर्नाटक फ्यूडल रेवेन्यू सिस्टम. ठीक, मिरासी हेरिडेटरी लैंड ऑनरशिप सिस्टम महाराष्ट्र में, मिरासी. अदादे ट्रेडिशनल टैक्स एंड रेंट सिस्टम. ठीक है. ब्रिटिश लैंड रेवेन्यू पॉलिसी Zamindari, Ryotwari, Mahalwari shaped into socio-economic conditions. Economic disparity among peasants led the later agrarian movement and nationalist resistance. British India's military expenditure. What was the total percentage of central revenue spent on military force in British India? तो ये 40% था. Around 40% of British India's total revenue was spent on maintaining the military. The British used the Indian army not only on internal control but also for external wars in Afghanistan, Burma and China, opium wars. Revenue for the military came from oppressive taxation policies, particularly land revenue. 40% historical data suggests that significant portion of British India revenue सही है. Financial burden on military spending was one of the key factors leading to drain of wealth from India. India was forced to participate in British imperial wars such as Anglo-Afghan Wars 1839-78, 1919, Burma War 1824, 52, 80, 85, World War I 1914 to 18, World War II 1939 to 45, where Indian soldiers fought for British Empire. Which among the following statements correctly define the term drain theory as propounded by Dada Naroji? That a part of Indian national wealth or a total annual product was being exported to Britain for which India got no material returns. मतलब यहाँ से जा तो रहा है लेकिन उधर से कोई रिटर्न नहीं मिल रहा है. दादा भाई नवरोजी Drain theory 1876 argued that India's wealth was systematically transferred to Britain without any economic return. He explained this concept in his book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India 1901. ठीक. Resources utilized in British interest. While drain theory specifically refers to the uncompensated transfer of wealth, uncompensated exports, Nauroji emphasized how money left India in the form of home charges, military expenses, and trade imbalances. British investments were primarily exploitative and aimed at reinforcing colonial dominance. British good imports. Though British goods harms Indian industry, drain theory focused on economic wealth loss rather than trade competition. Nauroji's key arguments on wealth drain, home charges, India paid for British administration, army pension and store purchases. Unrequited exports, raw materials were exported but India received no return in capital or infrastructure development. ठीक है. Which of the following propounded the drain theory? Dada Nauroji 1876 में. Nauroji was the grand old man of India, first articulated the drain wealth theory in 1876. His work provided statistical evidence on how British policy led to Indian poverty. Dada Bhai Nauroji, originator of drain theory, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a moderate nationalist who advocated self-governance but did not focus on the drain of wealth. Lokmanya Tilak, more involved in mass mobilization Swaraj movement than economic critics. Madan Mohan Malli focused on education and the Hindu Mahasabha. Who is the exponent of theory of economic drain of India during British rule? So Dada Bhai Nauroji. Dada Bhai Nauroji systematically studied and provided evidence on economic drain from India to Britain. M.N. Roy, associated with communist ideology and radical humanism. Jayaprakash Narayan led the Total Revolution movement 1974. Ram Manohar Lohia, a socialist leader who opposed Nehruvian policies. Dada Bhai Nauroji, pioneer of drain theory, published in his book Poverty, the Un-British Rule in India. Generally, India had a favorable balance of trade during British rule. Favorable balance of trade during British rule. The drain of wealth took the form of unrequired exports. ये कैसे? India had a trade surplus during British rule. अच्छा, meaning exports exceeds. अच्छा, इस वाले उससे ठीक है. India had a trade surplus during British rule, meaning exports exceed imports. However, this surplus did not benefit India because the earnings were drained away to Britain. Unrequited exports included raw materials like cotton, indigo, jute, and food grains, which were sent to Britain with no returns. Trade surplus existed but wealth was drained, making surplus meaningless. British used India's trade surplus to pay for their global empire expenses, including wars and administration. Railways, postal services, and administration were financed using Indian revenues rather than reinvested profits. Drain of wealth theory was a major critique of British colonial rule. India's economy suffered despite trade surplus because of financial outflows. ठीक, who among the following were economic critics of colonialism इन इंडिया? तो नरोजी, सुब्रमण्यम अय्यर और आरसी दत्ता तीनों लोग थे. दादा भाई नौरोजी propounded drain theory, stating that British rule economically exploited India. G. Subramania Iyer, editor of The Hindu, wrote about economic nationalism and British exploitation. R.C. Datta wrote Economic History of India, analyzing how British policies destroyed India's economy. All three were economic critics of British rule. Their work exposed how colonial policies led to deindustrialization, poverty, and famine. 1870 to 1905 was the period of economic nationalism in India, where leaders like Nauroji, Ranade, and Dutt critically analyzed British economic policies. Who among the following leaders did not believe in drain theory of Dada Nauroji? सर सैयद अहमद खान. देखिए, तिलक, दत्त और रानाडे ये लोग मानते थे. ठीक, एटीन सेवेंटी से 1905 तक माना जाता है इकोनॉमिक नेशनलिज्म इन इंडिया, वे लीडर्स लाइक नौरोजी, रानाडे एंड बाल गंगाधर तिलक, आरसी दत्त और रानाडे ये मानते थे कि ड्रेन थ्योरी ऑफ, मतलब इनमें बिलीव करते थे. लेकिन सर सैयद अहमद खान वाज प्रो ब्रिटिश and believed in Muslim loyalty in British. He argued that economic progress could only happen under British rule and opposed nationalist economic theories like drain theory. Bal Gangadhar Tilak opposed British economic exploitation. R.C. Datta, major proponent of economic nationalism. Ranade, early economic critic of colonial policies. ठीक है. In which year was the book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India published? तो 1901 में. This book by Dada Nauroji, Poverty and Un-British, Dada Nauroji provided a detailed analysis of drain theory. It explained how India's wealth was systematically drained by British through home charges, taxation, and trade policies. It was a landmark publication in Indian nationalist movement and influenced later leaders like Mahatma Gandhi. Who authored the book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India? तो दादा भाई नौरोजी. Nauroji book systematically analyzed how British rule impoverished India. He calculated economic drain from India and argued that Britain owed India reparations. Amartya Sen, Nobel laureates in economics, focused on modern development and famines. Ramesh Chandra Dutt wrote Economic History of India, analyzing British policies. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a moderate nationalist but not the author of the Dada Bhai Nauroji, primarily author of Drain Theory and Economic Critique of Colonialism. Poverty and British Rule. First Indian elected the British House of Commons was Dada Bhai Nauroji, who contested on the ticket of Liberal Party. Dada Bhai Nauroji was elected to the British Parliament in 1892 as a Liberal Party candidate. He used his position to raise India's economic grievances and advocate for self-rule. Nauroji election was a significant moment in India's struggle for political representation. Who wrote a book describing theory of economic drain of India during British rule? तो ड्रेन थ्योरी और ये अन ब्रिटिश रूल ये दादा भाई नौरोजी ने ही लिखा था. Nauroji provided the first detailed study on economic exploitation under British rule. Lala Lajpat Rai more focused on revolutionary nationalism. Mahatma Gandhi worked on Swaraj and non-cooperation, not economic. Nehru wrote Discovery of India, focused on freedom history. Dada Bhai Nauroji, pioneer of economic drain analysis. With reference to deindustrialization, which of the following statement is correct? This process started in 1813, बिल्कुल सही है. Abolition of monopoly, trade rights of East India Company aggravated the process, ये दोनों सही है. जब ईस्ट इंडिया जब और प्राइवेट पार्टनर्स आने लगे तो लूट और बढ़ गई। लूट और बढ़ गई तो इससे क्या हुआ, मतलब एक्सपोर्ट्स ज़्यादा होने लगे और यहाँ इनकमिंग सिर्फ ब्रिटिश चीज़ों का होने लगा। हम लोग क्या बन गए, सिर्फ कंज्यूमर बन गए। Deindustrialization began in 1813 when the Charter Act allowed unrestricted British food in Indian markets. Abolition of the East India Company's monopoly 1833 further worsened deindustrialization as private British traders exploited Indian markets. ठीक है, in stated in 1813 Indian handicrafts and textiles suffered due to British imports. Abolition of monopoly trade increased British private trade's control over Indian markets. By 1850, India's share in world manufacturing fell from 25% to 2% due to industrialization. मतलब 100 साल के अंदर 25% से सिर्फ 2% रह गया। British policies turned India into a raw material supplier and consumer of British goods. British economic policies systematically drained India's wealth. Economic nationalists Nauroji Dutt and Rana De played a key role in highlighting colonial exploitation. Contribution of Dada Acha. The most effective contribution made by Dadabhai Nauroji to the cause of Indian national movement was that he exposed the economic exploitation of India by the British Shah, interpreted the ancient Indian text and restored the self-confidence of Indians. नहीं economic states the need for eradication of all social evil before anything else. नहीं, सबसे बड़ा तो यही economic exploitation वाला उन्होंने बोला था। Dadabhai Nauroji's most significant contribution was his economic critique of British rule. He developed the drain theory, explaining how British policies systematically drained Indian wealth. His book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India provided statistical evidence of British exploitation. ठीक, exposed economic exploitation. This was his primary contribution through the drain theory. Interpretation of Indian text. This was more related to Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Swami Dayanand Saraswati. Eradication of social evils. While important, leaders like Raja Ram Mohan Rai and Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar focused more on social reforms. Nauroji was the first Indian elected to the British House of Commons 1892 and used his position to raise Indian economic grievances. He was a founding member of Indian National Congress 1885 and played a major role in economic nationalism. Who considered that British economic policy is disgusting in India? Karl Marx ने कहा था। Karl Marx ने कहा था कि Karl Marx criticized British rule in India in his writing, stating that British economic policies led to ruin the Indian agriculture industry. He wrote in New York Daily Tribune 1853 that British rule impoverished Indian cultivators and artisans. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was a nationalist leader, but his focus was on Swaraj, not economic critique on British policies. Dadabhai Nauroji criticized economic exploitation but did not use term disgusting. Karl Marx criticized British policies in his writing on India. Adam Smith advocated free market policies and had no connection with India's colonial economy. Marx saw British rule as both destructive and potentially progressive, as it disrupted old feudal system but introduced capitalist exploitations. ठीक है, who is regarded as pioneer of irrigation work in South India? तो ये थे अर्थर कॉटन. सर अर्थर कॉटन was a British irrigation engineer who significantly Arthur Cotton, British irrigation engineer who significantly contributed to irrigation project in South India. He built the Godavari Anicut and Krishna Anicut, improving irrigation and preventing famines. तो अर्थर कॉटन जो थे वो मतलब ठीक आदमी थे. Arthur Cotton, Sir Arthur Cotton, major contributor to irrigation project in Madras Presidency. Colonel Bayard Smith worked in famine relief measures. ठीक, Colonel Bayard Smith, Lieutenant Blaine, कोई बने, Robert Smith, more involved in military engineering. Robert Smith. His irrigation projects, Arthur Cotton का जो irrigation project था, were instrumental in reducing drought effects and boosting agricultural productivity in South India. With reference to the history of India, consider the following pairs. औरंग इन चार्ज ऑफ ट्रेजरी ऑफ द स्टेट नहीं। बनियान बनियान इंडियन एजेंट ऑफ द ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी, बिल्कुल सही है। मिरासीदर डिसिग्नेटेड रेवेन्यू पेयर ऑफ द स्टेट, सही है। औरंग क्या थे, इज ए पर्शियन टर्म ऑफ वेयर हाउस, औरंग वेयर हाउस कहते हैं औरंग को। बनियन वॉज एन इंडियन एजेंट एंड मिडिल मैन हु वर्क फॉर यूरोपियन ट्रेडर्स इंक्लूडिंग ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी, बनियन दलाल को बनियन। मिरासीदर वॉज ए लैंड लॉर्ड और रेवेन्यू पेयर इन साउथ इंडिया, ये महाराष्ट्र में मिरास नहीं पढ़े थे, स्पेशली अंडर रेतवारी सिस्टम। इंडियन ट्रेडर्स एंड मिडिल मैन प्लेड ए क्रूशियल रोल इन ब्रिटिश कमर्शियल एक्सपेंशन, बनियन मिरासीदर। और औरंग को क्या कहते हैं, औरंग को कहते हैं पर्शियन में वेयर हाउस। और बनियन जो था मिडिल मैन था, इंडियन मतलब ये समझिए कि खबरी था। और मिरासीदर रेवेन्यू पेयर रेतवारी में साउथ इंडिया में या महाराष्ट्र में कह लीजिए। इकोनॉमिकली वन ऑफ द रिजल्ट ऑफ ब्रिटिश इंडिया इन 19th century was commercialization of Indian agriculture. British economically one of the results of British India in India 19th under British rule, Indian agriculture shifted from subsistence farming to cash crop production for British industries. ठीक, farmers were forced to grow cash crops like indigo, opium, cotton and jute instead of food crops, leading to food shortages. ठीक, exports of handicraft, Indian handicraft declined due to British factory made goods. Growth of Indian factories, British policy discouraged Indian industrialization. Commercialization of agriculture, India became a supplier of raw material for British industry. British policy led to rural distress and migration, but not rapid urbanization. This policy led to peasant revolts such as Indigo Revolt 1859 to 60. Industry, which of the following statement correctly explain the impact of industrial revolution on India during the first half of 19th century? तो वो था कि इंडियन हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स वर रूइंड। ठीक, इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन लेड टू मशीन मेड ब्रिटिश टेक्सटाइल्स फ्लडिंग इंडियन मार्केट्स and destroying traditional handicraft. British policies favored industrial goods from England while imposing heavy duties on Indian textile. Indian handicrafts were ruined. British policies and industrialization led to deindustrialization in India. ठीक, industrialization in India was deliberately suppressed. रेलवे वेयर बिल्ट इन 1850s, 1853 में बना था टू सर्व ब्रिटिश इकोनॉमिक इंटरेस्ट। हैवी ड्यूटीज ऑन ब्रिटिश, गलत है। हैवी ड्यूटीज वेयर इम्पोज्ड ऑन इंडियन टेक्सटाइल्स, एक्सपोर्ट्स पे वो हो रहा था, नॉट ब्रिटिश इम्पोर्ट्स। बाय 1850 इंडिया शेयर इन वर्ल्ड टेक्सटाइल एक्सपोर्ट्स हैड फॉलन ड्रास्टिकली ड्यू टू ब्रिटिश इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी। British economic policies systematically drained India's wealth. Deindustrialization and commercialization of agriculture were key impact of British rule. ठीक, तो ये हम लोग का ख़त्म होता है। ठीक, थैंक यू, बाय बाय।